I'm Natalie from the Early Years Alliance, and today I'm here to share with you some ideas for mark making activities that you can do at home with your children, and talk to you a little bit about the developmental benefits of mark making for babies and young children. Your baby's first mark making will most likely happen as part of their exploration of food. So we often find that children will smear their food around, and they will make marks on their high chair table or on your table, even on their plates and in their dishes. And this is a really key experimental time for them. They're starting to explore that action. They're using their arms and their fingers a little bit more, with a bit more control. And they'll start to recognise that actually they do have some control over the marks that they are making, and they'll start to see what's happening to the things that they're manipulating with their fingers. Now, when babies start to be given tools, so you might give them a brush, or you might even find it when they've got their spoon when they're eating, that they hold it with what we call a palmar grasp. So they will grab that tool with their whole hand, and they will mostly use their whole arm and shoulder to move that tool. Of course, as they develop and gather that control, they will develop that ability to hold it in the normal pen grip, which will be the start of early writing skills. But there's quite a long period of development between that first holding of a tool and that palmar grasp when we see those early writing skills. And they need lots of practice to develop that strength and control. And what they're developing is both their gross motor skills, so developing that strength and control in their larger muscles, like in their arms and their shoulders and their torso, through to their fine motor skills, where they're developing that strength and control in their fingers. Mark making isn't exclusively limited to things like using pencil crayons and pens. We can actually extend mark making to be a really wide and varied experience for young children, using lots of different materials. And by using lots of materials of different consistencies and different types, it's going to give them more opportunities to develop those muscles in different ways. And when they are mark making, they're developing that physical strength and coordination in a range of different ways. So they're going to be developing their hand-eye coordination, their balance and stability in their trunk and in their hips. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about developing their ability to cross their midline, so using their right hand on the left hand side of their body, and how that's really important in terms of brain development. They're using their upper body, so they're using their arms and their shoulders. And actually, if you were to place your hand on your child's back when they are mark making, you will actually feel how much they are using those muscles in their shoulders and their backs to be able to move their arm and to make those marks. So they are developing those larger muscles when they're doing that. They're also developing their mobility and control in their wrist. So again, they've got to keep that subtlety in their wrist, and they've got to develop that control of their muscles. And they're developing strength in their hands. So they're developing that ability to move their fingers separately and to develop their pincer grip, so to be able to pick something up between their finger and their thumb. And all of those skills are really key in terms of developing the skill and control that they need to be able to hold a pen or a pencil in that correct pencil grip. So if you think about how that pincer grip operates and moving those fingers independently, how that then translates to holding a pen, you can see that direct connection there. So what I'd like to do is show you a few different things that you could do with your babies and young children, different mark making materials that you can use, and a little bit about why each of those things is a really positive experience in terms of their development. So the first thing I wanted to show you is some taste-safe baby paint. So I've made this using a little bit of the shop-bought baby rice. I've made it up with some boiling water, and I've added a little bit of food colouring, and you can see that I've sort of achieved kind of 3 colours there. You don't need to use much, because if you do, particularly the yellow, it will stain your baby's fingers. Of course, it's going to come off in the bath, but it might take a little bit of soaking off there. So you only need a really little bit of colour, and of course it's better if you can use food colourings that are derived from natural colourings, so we're not using those E-numbers and chemicals in there with our babies. But what you've got there is something that is absolutely safe for them to put into their mouths. It is a food stuff, but we're using it in a different way. We're using it for a messy play activity and to initiate some early mark making. You could present this in a number of ways. So you could just have this out on your baby's high chair, so they've got that surface area there to use, and just let them use their fingers. You could have them on a waterproof surface, or like a splash mat on the floor, or maybe even just a tiled floor. Again, just take care with the colouring that it doesn't stain your surface. If you've got a tuff tray, that would be fantastic. You could sit them in there and give them this to explore, and they can get as messy as they like. They can use it as a finger paint, so they can actually just dip their finger in, and they could be offered some paper to make those marks on, or you could give them a nice chunky paintbrush that they can use that Palmer grass for, and they can get their baby paint on there. You could give it a little workaround for them. It does get a little bit sticky when it's been left for a little while, and then what they can do is they can make those big marks, and you can see it does actually mark white paper really well. Of course, this is going to get a little bit messy. Babies wash really well, so please allow them to have that experience. It's really important because that sensory element is going to help the development within their brain in terms of those neural pathways of making those connections. When a baby explores something on more than one sensory level, then the impact of that is greater in terms of their learning. So really simple mark making solution there. Rather than giving your baby perhaps a shot bought paint, which is often non-toxic and safe for them to put in their mouth a little, but of course we wouldn't want them to be ingesting large amounts of that. So if we give them something that is completely food and taste safe, it takes away that element there of risk. We're not trying to hamper that child's exploration by saying, don't put it in your mouth, take your hands out of your mouth. We can let them have that full experience because we know that what we're providing them with is completely safe. So really lovely one for babies. The next thing I want to suggest in terms of mark making is using Play-Doh. So actually manipulating that material and making impressions within that Play-Doh is a really great mark making activity, and it really supports the strengthening of the muscles in their fingers. If you would like a homemade Play-Doh recipe, then you can have a look on the videos here on YouTube. There is one there that is a guidance to making your homemade Play-Doh. So again, it's thinking outside just pens and paper and crayons. What else can we make marks in, make impressions in that the child can then see? And what's really key is that you are acknowledging that with your child and describing those marks that they've made. Oh, you've pushed your finger into there and look, it's left a little circle. Oh, shall we try what happens when we put this rolling pin across it? What if we try and use a stamper? What does that do? And talking to them about the marks that they are making as they are making them, whether that's using a tool or whether that's using their finger, is going to really support their language development at the same time as their gross and fine motor skills. And we want to always try and maximise that development. So if we can hit several areas at once, then let's do that by supporting our child verbally in their play. The next thing I want to show you is just a variant on actually what you make your marks onto. So we often buy sheets of paper, books of paper for children, but actually a roll of paper is a really great thing to have at home. This is kind of parcel paper. The brown works really nice, lots of different colours on there. You can buy like wallpaper, lining paper, the plain one, you can get that from DIY shops. Wrapping paper, if you've got a bit left over from Christmas, use the reverse, use the white side, and they can use that up in a different way. This is great because you can cut chunks off to use sitting at a table or sticking it onto like an easel or something like that. But what you can also do is you can roll it out across the floor and make a really big mark making area for your child. That's going to give them a little bit more freedom to work on a different level, so they can get down and work on the floor, which means they're going to use their muscles in a slightly different way. We can give them paints, pens, crayons, anything to make those marks on the floor, which they're going to just be using slightly different technique there to do it as they would if they were seated at a table. Paint sticks are really wonderful. They're quite a kind of new craft material really. They're sort of like a solid poster paint and they dry extremely quickly. They're also, these chunky ones are really great again for babies and toddlers using that Palmer grass because they can just grab hold of these and they're quite easy to make the marks. So they're going to get that recognition and that sense of achievement from the marks that they've made on the page, but they also dry extremely quickly. So keep your eye out for those they're a really great thing to have in your craft box, as again, just something different from, if it's not a day where you want to venture to getting all the wet paints out, then something like this is really useful. In terms of using paints, the sort of thicker kind of poster paint type paints are really great for making those thick marks. If you want to do finger painting, that would be a really great paint to use. Also these little watercolour sets, I think this one was £1. They're really quite cheap to buy and last quite a long time. For a slightly older child, because they're going to have to understand that technique of dipping into the water, then into the colour, and then onto the page to make that mark. But these are going to be really lovely for that control when they get into that stage of really controlling that brush in a smaller area, not just thinking about how they're using that control on the page, but actually that control for how they're getting the colour in the first place. That's a really nice one for a slightly older child there. Whilst we're still on paints, homemade brushes. Again, just thinking about something that's going to engage your child on a creative level for a different activity that they haven't done before. So I've got a little bit of paint in a tray. Grab my paper. And what I've got here is some cooked spaghetti. So I've got a little bunch of pasta and I've put a small elastic band around the top, and then I popped that into a pan of boiling water for about 5 minutes. So I just had the water up to here, and as you can see it's just lightly cooked. The bit on the bottom, it's really squishy and wiggly, really lovely one for Halloween that looks a little bit like a broomstick. And what you can do is your child can dip that into a tray of paint and use that then to make their marks on the page. And it just gives them something different, a different way of making those marks. This would be a really lovely one to marry up with your large paper on the floor, your roll of paper, because they'd have a really big surface area for making those marks. You can make ones of different thicknesses by putting fewer strands of the spaghetti in there, so they've got kind of a range of paintbrushes. So homemade spaghetti paintbrushes. Another really simple homemade brush would be just to grab, this is some like straw grass, just grab a bunch, again with a little elastic on there. It's something else that they can dip into that paint and use as a brush. You could tie this in with a nice nature walk, go out there. What are we going to use for our homemade brushes today? Can we get some twigs? Could we try some little branches that have actually got leaves on there? Different types of grasses. Could we bunch together some leaves and maybe use that as a paintbrush? So thinking outside the box a little bit in terms of your mark making tools, having a go at some homemade ones to give a little bit of variety to your mark making activities at home. So some nice homemade brushes. The next thing I wanted to mention was working on a vertical surface. So we talked about working on the floor or at a seated position, but actually it's really great for your child's development to allow them to do mark making on a vertical surface. A lovely easy way to do that would be chalks on a fence or a wall. It washes off nice and easy, and it gives them that opportunity to use their muscles in a different way when they are mark making. The midline, so crossing of that midline, so developing that skill to use the opposite sides of their brain and to be able to connect using their hand on this side of their body and actually use it over the other. You will often see with babies and younger children that they don't have as much of a preference for left and right, but they'll just use the hand that's closest to the object on that side of their body. And it's really important that we start to encourage them to cross that midline and to reach across and to use their hand over on that opposite side, crossing that midpoint of their body. And doing mark making, particularly on a vertical surface, is a really good way of doing that because it provides them with the opportunity to reach. So can we do a zigzag line from one side of the wall all the way over to the other? Can we do one going the other way? So we're just encouraging that reach, and we're aiming for that overall gross motor development there of different groups of muscles for that overall strength and control. And all of this is going to translate to their early writing skills. So it's so important that we build these bigger muscles so that then they've got that control of their fine motor for when they're writing. Another way we can use the chalks, or I've used some white paint here, which is a similar sort of effect. I've got a tray and I've painted some numbers into the tray. So I would prepare this ahead of time for the child. You could use letters, maybe letters in their name, or even kind of keywords a little bit further on. And what we're going to do is provide the child with a paintbrush and some water. And the aim of the activity is for them to wet their brush and then actually try and trace over and paint over the lines that we've made until they disappear. So they're sort of trying to rub them out, and in doing that they are tracing over the numbers or the letters. So we've got that added early maths or early literacy skills there as well, with that number and letter recognition. But they're also developing that fine and gross motor there in terms of using those mark making tools. You can see how they can just sort of rub that out. So you could use a light coloured paint or chalk work really well for that. You can use different thicknesses of brush depending on how much control your child has of their tools. So a kind of chunkier brush for less. If they're getting really quite controlled with their mark making, then you can give them a really fine paintbrush and make the marks on the tray a little bit finer. So it's something for them to trace over, do mark making in a slightly different way. They're making their marks with the water. And thinking about water, the last activity that I want to suggest in terms of developing your child's fine and gross motor skills to support their early writing skills is a trip to the park. So getting out there and supporting your child and encouraging your child to use play equipment is going to work all of those muscles that I've been talking about that are really important for them to be able to do this mark making. And you can take something as simple as a handful of paintbrushes and a bottle of water along with you. That will give them the opportunity to do mark making on lots of different surfaces, on walls, on paths. You can even take things like little squirty water bottles. That's really going to build those muscles in their fingers. Also learning that sense of control, of aiming where that's going. So water play at a park or playground in an open area, just taking along your brushes and just using the water. Really simple way to support them with those skills. No mess, it's all outdoors, it's water, it's just going to dry, but that is going to be just as valid in terms of supporting those skills as them sitting down with paints and paper inside. So vary that opportunity for them, keep them engaged and interested, give them that wide range of different things, but always remembering to support by recognising and pointing out the marks that they have made, talking to them about what they are doing and describing their movements as they work. If you'd like any other ideas for things that you can do at home with your children, then you can go to www.familycorner.co.uk. Lots of ideas and advice on there, or you can have a look at the other videos that we have on YouTube at the Early Years Alliance YouTube channel. As I've mentioned, there are some other videos that have some mark making activities, and your Play-Doh activity is on there as well.